Okay, so hello everyone who's been joining us here. I just want to kick us off by saying welcome to, I believe this is our sixth speaker series event, thereabouts. And we inaugurated it this year, and the purpose is simply to give leaders in the field of youth development a platform to talk about their latest work and teach us a bit about what they're doing, but also open the door to a dialogue and Q&A. That is something that is going to be, that mission is going to be fulfilled greatly today by our guest, Ben Houltberg. He is the president and CEO of the Search Institute based in Minneapolis. And we want to welcome Ben this morning. Well, we're here this morning, Eastern time in the US. And we're really happy to have him here. And we really look forward to what he's going to offer in terms of sharing his knowledge and leading a discussion. But before I hand it over to Ben, I'd like to hand it over to Mike Nuckola. Before I do that, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Andrew Babson, the co-founder and associate director of the Global Possibility Network based at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. And my colleague Mike is the founder of the GPN, and he's also the chair of the Human Development and Quantitative Methods Division at the Penn GSE. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Mike.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to have Ben with us today. I'm going to give you a twofold brief introduction. I know Ben primarily through an introductory conversation I had with him and then a deeper dive into the work he's done. So we're particularly pleased to have him because of his focus on youth development from a relational perspective, largely, but also from a community development perspective. Secondly, I have been a long time colleagues from the Search Institute, including Jean, whom I see online with us, Roki Partain. Jean and I go back, I guess, a decade and a half to 2 decades now. I kind of lost track of the years, but Search Institute has been a standard bearer for what we might call strength-based youth development or positive youth development for years. And from my perspective, has been one of the most instrumental and important institutes in the country focused on these topics. So I have, earlier on, I was a visiting scholar at Search and spent a lot of time with the former leadership team there, and have been anxious, actually, to see how the leadership structure at Search evolves, because it is such an important organization within our country and around the world in some respects. So as we'll hear from Ben, there's been an evolution from the focus primarily on developmental assets at one point in time and how communities use developmental assets to related phenomena. So without further explanation of things I don't really know what I'm talking about, I'm going to hand it over to Ben to give us a more contemporary view of what Search is up to and what he is up to as the leader of that important organization. So Ben, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. It's fun to one of the things that was really important for me in my journey. I always say I started out as a practitioner. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and working in community-based settings, and then into a large school district. And I love that work. I still think of those kids. I still see their faces. It was really early on in my career that this amazing kind of this understanding that every young person has something to offer the world, something that is unique. And when you work with young people, or you know them and you're around them, that spark, that thing that you see lights them up, and the energy that's around this kind of their passions and their purpose is is something I saw in the young people that I worked with every day. And there was nothing more tragic than when that spark did not have the opportunity or the access to support to really turn into the flame that motivated them through their lives. And a lot of that kind of unwavering truth that every young person has something to offer the world is really a core piece of Search Institute, is a core piece of the positive youth development movement. But in practice is also what we all know, that young people are amazing, that they have something that they can shape the world and contribute to the world right now at this time, when given the access and the opportunity. And that is a core of why I really wanted to go into the field and understand it more. I did not really know positive youth development. I knew of Search Institute at that time when I was working with young people, and there was something that I really loved about this idea that young people have assets, they have strengths right now, and that no person should be defined by their risks or their deficits in their systems, but what are those things that are all going right? What are those things within young people? That always resonated with me as a practitioner. And then I went into the academic world, really in getting a academic degree in developmental psych, with a developmental psych focus mostly, and understanding emotions and emotion regulation and what shapes emotions and emotion regulation. And we were studying the psychophysiology of really of young people that face tremendous challenges and exposure to violence and things, but also the power of relationships. That there was this incredible, not just kind of social emotional development protective factor here, but a physiological one. But when we talk about the ability to manage or modulate our emotions in different contexts, it is not just an intra kind of influence, it's also interpersonal. And we saw that physiologically, that those young people that were connected and have that sense of connection to parents and to other people in their lives, that it provided them a protection against the challenges that they're facing. The ability to thrive even in the face of adversity was pretty incredible. And that work all started to build for me as I was going through my journey. And I started out at Purdue on the Fort Wayne campus, and was teaching and was there 4 years, and still overseeing the clinic for the marriage and family therapy, some of the students there. And then I ended up at the Thrive Center for Human Development, which was at this Fuller School of Psychology that had a connection to Search Institute. And this is where, for me, the kind of my background and really understanding, probably more from a developmental psychopathology perspective, begin to really shift into understanding positive youth development more, in particular what the power of a sense of purpose can do for young people. And when we talk about purpose as really being that life aim or that direction that young people are moving towards, that also is connected to contributing to something bigger than the self. And I'm telling kind of my own story as I get into this, because I think it's interwoven into this work that I'm doing and that we continue to do at Search. And it was interesting because for me, this journey also kind of took me in a direction that seems out of the kind of chronological way you would go through, or the path you would go through with academia. I got tenure, but I was still feeling this pull and this sense of my own purpose towards youth development and towards really doing applied research. Because again, for me, even when we looked at the numbers, I kept thinking of faces. I kept seeing the faces, and that was this shift for me. Meanwhile, I was hired at USC in this Performance Science Institute because of some of my work around sense of purpose and sports and athletics, and kind of tying some things together around identity and this challenge that young young people face today when they put their worth and their value as human beings in some sort of result. And we studied it in sports, but we were looking at other performing arts as well. And that was really another important kind of piece to this, is like, as we think about how young people are shaping their sense of identity and their worth and their value, what are the messages that they are internalizing about themselves? And when I was doing this at USC with some amazing, elite athletes, and got to do a study with the Seattle Seahawks and get to know Pete Carroll very well, and got to work in kind of all these amazing startups and all these places. But again, this pull for my purpose was, no, I really wanted to get back to youth development. I had no idea what I was about to get into by moving to Search Institute. And so I reached out and I talked to Gene. I called Gene on the phone when I knew him, and we talked, and I stepped out of the kind of academic world altogether 4 years ago to be at Search Institute, and I can't imagine a better place. And the reason why I put that foundation is because a couple of reasons. As I kind of get more into maybe part of the parts that I want to hit home and then have some discussion about, is positive youth development was really some of the amazing things about how it emerged was it became a field of research, but it also started with an arena of practice. That it was this research and practice kind of movement that began to challenge the idea that young people were being defined by their deficits. And I think, like, oh, I need a hostability, I think, to share my screen. And I think that from a person who was in as a practitioner, who then moved into academia, and then now is really kind of working in this nonprofit space of doing applied research, I realized how even though we talk about this gap between research and practice regularly in academia, I don't know that we really know how big that gap is, because there's wisdom and there's incredible things within the practitioners and the young people themselves that often can take a back seat to the research wisdom in science. And so one of the big challenges that I'll get into and think about is, what does actionable knowledge around youth development really mean? It means that we have to start elevating the wisdom, the different forms of wisdoms that exist, including, of course, the empirical research and the science that we do, but also with the community and the practitioner wisdom that's on the ground every day working with young people, and the voice of the young people themselves, that they have something to offer right now, that they're not problems to be solved, but how can we elevate that together? And I think that is what today's idea, when we start thinking about positive youth development, has to begin to move towards. And so if you're not familiar kind of with, and please, as I go through this, please feel free to put things in the chat. I would also love, it's a smaller group, I'd love to know who you are, where you're coming from, which if you're coming like as a practitioner or a researcher, I would love to see that as well. But so just to root people who may not know kind of the Search Institute and the positive youth development is, one of the big vision and the kind of big idea that we are really trying to work with partners around is creating conditions for all youth to thrive. That we believe that all youth are capable of thriving when provided the right access to the relationships and resources and supports in order to do so. But we also know that there's inequities in access, and so but the roots of Search Institute go back 60 plus years. But when we look at the kind of catalyst of this movement of positive youth development, it really started to emerge in the 90s. And I don't know how many of you, like for me, my high school years were in the 90s, my early college years. I remember the 90s. I remember, and my kids still, like, you know, I have two boys, and they don't believe me that I still say, hey, the 90s still has the best music. It has the best, you know, like we all do, that nostalgia towards the 90s. But one thing that we really know from the 90s, especially, was this problem saturated narrative that began to emerge around this idea of a super predator, around this idea of young people being wired towards criminal activity, this idea that there's a lot going wrong with young people, and we have to solve it. And these challenges are greater than they've ever been in the history of time. And that got embedded into even kind of the concern towards music and culture and all these things. And this is where positive youth development really began to really kind of organically emerge. And Search Institute's role in that was to begin to think about what is from a practitioner standpoint, how do we begin to shape the framing of how we see young people, and the mindset that practitioners and people approach young people to see their strengths. And this is where the developmental assets framework came up. If you, and Gene is on this call, and Mike, you know this well, and others, that the developmental assets framework was not necessarily designed to be a research framework. It was really designed for the practitioner. It was designed to have an eco map of the strengths of young people that was really important, and kind of caught fire in the field, that it began to spread across coalitions. It was a part of statewide initiatives. Today it has over 2,000 publications. It went international, over 40 plus countries. And there was something about the hope that a strength-based approach brought, and there was many others at the time that contributed to this, but it really provided, I think, practitioners with something that many of them already knew. Like me, as that practitioner in the field, knew, like, if you were to talk negative about the kids I worked with, you were going to have to fight me, you know, because those were the kids, those were my kids, those were the kids I worked with. I saw their strengths, I saw who they were, and I didn't want you describing them in that way. And I feel the same way with my own kids today. And I think this was kind of the essence of the movement. And the reason why I want to put some of this into play is because as we think about today, and we think about where we are today, we see this ongoing, persistent, and pervasive deficit narrative about youth again, and it continues to grow. And it's not that there's some truth to really understanding the mental health crisis and the challenges that young people are facing today. It's not that there's some truth to the damage and the challenges that the pandemic brought, or that social media can have some negative influences. Yes, there's truth to all that, but that's not the single narrative about today's youth. And we have to be able to understand and challenge that, because what happens is, just like we saw in the 90s, there are still policies that linger from the 90s that were based in a deficit approach that drove some of the ways that juvenile justice was done and the ways that things were funded, that were based on a narrative that wasn't even rooted in the science. And I think this is where my feeling of urgency is today, is to remind us that there is that we can't fall back into the trap of a constricted narrative about young people that then will drive the way that we approach young people, and not really leverage the incredible strengths that they already bring. And we know that this is true from our own data, as we continue to collect data now over this period of time of over 6 million young people we have data on, from developmental assets and developmental relationships. And we know this generation craves and understands the importance, with 67%, and this is kind of a growth between the pre-pandemic and the post-pandemic time, of young people who are strongly agreeing about important values around inclusive values like caring and equity and social justice and cultural competence and valuing diversity. the truth is about today's youth too, is they demand a voice, and they are really craving the opportunity to have that voice elevated. And we're missing so much of the story and some of the dominant headlines that kind of will, in some ways, I'll just say it in this group, in some ways cherry pick data in a way to then paint kids as in a certain light that can create fear and create challenge. I think, you know, I get sucked into coaching different things for my 10-year-old and 6-year-old. And as people get to know me and know what I do, mostly what I hear is a fear-based parenting approaches to their kids that they're hearing in the news every day about what's going on. And so this becomes really an important kind of starting point for us. But there's a new reality, and it's not the same positive youth development of the past. And Search Institute can't just lean on that legacy of impact, because today there's a whole host of influences and ecosystems that are impacting kids today. And we have to be able to recognize that. And we're in a different era. It's a different time. The post George Floyd, post kind of a racial reckoning, post pandemic. There's a need for a different approach than what was done in the 90s. And also we know that we can no longer ignore, or not, maybe ignore is not the right word. We can no longer not explicitly name that inequities exist, that we have to hold on to the complexity that all kids, every young person has something to offer this world. But, and there's a big but there are many who are not receiving or have access to those resources and relationships to help them thrive. And that it's not a matter of a young person, even when it's not a matter of a young person having to kind of, that is failing us, but it's more of like, or that there's something inherently wrong. It's more of the shared responsibility that we have to come together to say, we are responsible for creating this thriving ecosystem together for young people that begin to provide more access in equitable ways, that begins to understand the unique needs and challenges that many youth and families and communities that have been pushed to the margins have endured and have not have had barriers in the way of their thriving. And the great news about this is, like, there's a lot of players in the field now. Like, these are just a few that have really taken on this idea of thriving and talked about that it's not just mere surviving, that it's not just being problem free, but we have to go further than that. And there is a movement around this both in the research, but also in the field. If you start to see that people are saying, like, no one person, no one organization could be all things to you, to every young person at all times, but as a community or an ecosystem, we can. And this has some of the shades of the community-based work that was done in the early days of the PYD that seems to be coming back into play as we begin to think about this bigger vision of what it means to creating these thriving ecosystems for young people. And we also know that there's a lot more science just on developmental needs of young people, that there's a window of opportunity that is an incredible opportunity for us to lean into. The Center for Developing Adolescence is just one of those that's been really putting a lot out there on how we frame young people and how we frame adolescence in particular, and that we know that there's these core developmental needs that young people have that we want to be able to create within their developmental and learning ecosystems. In Search Institute, really one of the pieces that has been missing, I think, in the transition, Mike, as you were talking about this, is the developmental assets framework was also very much a prevention framework. But there was a whole host of research that started really around that idea of spark, that young people had this spark. And when that spark was aligned with opportunity of resources and relationships in their environment, that this thriving trajectory is really important for us to talk about. And this is something that I think we have to start moving towards again, and thinking about how are we not only meeting the developmental needs of young people, but how are we creating the opportunity for them to truly thrive. And as we look at our own data in this space, we can start to see some areas of trends that young people are expressing, of even some of the meeting some of these basic needs that all young people deserve: the opportunity to feel seen, heard, valued, and safe. That's the fundamental, that's the baseline, that's the starting point. But we have to go beyond that, because they're craving this sense of purpose, and they're thinking about this sense of purpose. So 72% of this particular data set, in our most recent data set of about, almost 30,000 young people, is 72% of them said they very often or almost always think about their own sense of purpose, but yet they're also feeling like it challenging in their sense of autonomy, of dealing with disappointment and the view of the future. And there's trends that are coming up there that really we have to start to say, how do we address these relationally? How do we address these within the ecosystem, so that we can be thinking about not only meeting those developmental needs, but helping to move to this idea of thriving. And one thing that we've doubled down on is and you all know this too. And I mentioned it earlier, and even my own journey, is it's almost impossible to overstate the power of relationships. That even with relational wounds and traumatic experiences and adverse childhood experiences, what we know from research and what we know from kind of the science of relationships is that relational wounds require relational healing, and that there's something very powerful that can happen in connection and in a relationship. But not all relationships are created equal, that we have to be intentional about the types of relationships that meet young people where they are and meet their developmental needs. And this is where the developmental relationships framework really came from, after a decade of trying to understand what are some of those key ingredients and elements of a relationship that are really the difference that makes a difference for young people, that are geared towards their developmental needs. And so one of the things the reason why I have this up is because as we continue to get the data on this, we often hear people in the field, or even across sectors, talk about, oh yeah, relationships, we're really good at that. Like we're all about relationships. But then when we start to measure and we look at this other gap that exists in what adults and staff and teachers and mentors will report that they're expressing to young people, are doing for young people are also, when we get those multiple reporters, we're seeing this gap between what youth are really reporting they're experiencing and what the adults around them are saying they're doing. Now, this gap is not unusual. When we were doing a lot of data around parents early in my career, did a lot of multiple reporters within the same family system. We see gaps between adults and kids. There's lots of reasons for that. But there's also meaning in that gap, because we also know that the subjective reality of young people really drives a lot of their outcomes, a lot of their emotional outcomes, a lot of their mental health outcomes. And so again, getting back to what are young people experiencing in their relational ecosystem, and how are we really actually thinking about this and measuring this and moving towards shifting these gaps that might exist. And I'm not going to go into the development relationship framework specifically. I'm happy to do that if there's some questions around it. But I wanted to just give some of the pictures and try to integrate some of the larger data trends we're seeing with also some of this kind of broad perspective of how do we move towards this kind of ecosystem approach that centers relationships and also affirms and elevates the strength-based narrative about the communities and young people, particularly for those who have had their narratives hijacked by this deficit-based approach. And in practice, we're seeing this too. KP Catalyst, who includes Karen Pittman, who is also really one of the pioneers in positive youth development, has been doing a series of webinars around thriving ecosystems. They're working with Tom Akiva at University of Pittsburgh around learning ecosystems and centering schools and learning ecosystems to be thriving ecosystems. And out of this kind of collaborative partnership of practitioners, this movement is coming up also. So we see it with this convergence in research, and we're seeing it also on the ground. And some of the statements that have come out of this collaborative, I really love, and we're a part of this collaborative and partnership. But youth thriving is more than well-being. Thriving communities need thriving youth. Thriving youth need thriving ecosystems. Thriving ecosystems need thriving systems. So at the end of the day, when we're talking about this work together and beginning to bring people around this, is it really requires all of us. Wherever you sit in this system, it's really, I think, an important imperative that we are all contributing to creating these kind of ecosystems, whether we're sitting in academia, whether we're sitting in policy tables, whether we're sitting in as a practitioner in schools. But there's a way that we have to begin to bring people together around a shared vision about young people that I think has a lot of hope. I think it is, I heard this said, by Michelle Obama the other day, that hope is making a comeback. And I think there's something very true about that when we start thinking about what we can do to create thriving ecosystems, and we start to think about how we can come together around those. So this is the big design complex question that we're wrestling with. And it's not Search Institute. And I think it would be a mistake if us as a nonprofit, even with our impact in the field, tried to create something around us, because it can't be about us. It has to be about a movement. But how might we empower action, begin to create this action and create tools for this action across the system that penetrates the broader youth support ecosystem? Even, I just had an article in Journal of Consumer Psychology where we try to make this case even for content providers and content creators and social media, that ecosystem, if we can start to begin to shift the way that even content creators are thinking about young people, and what does that mean to be able to do that, or cities themselves. And we have a couple projects where we're working with a group of people around shifting cities towards thinking this way, with this reimagined approach to positive youth development that enables all youth to thrive. We also, one of the things, I don't know if you know the design group IDEO, but part of this work has been really thinking with IDEO of how do we create an imagined future that are really hard, that they say that you have to kind of squint to see. And this design question is part of that conversation that came out of that as well. And so we're trying to really step into this new era and this new space in a new way. And that's what I wanted to bring today. I didn't really want to give answers. We have some ideas of thinking about this, of really beginning, how do we create these more meta narratives about thriving that aligns organizations? How do we create a broad movement that has is orchestrated around commonalities that we're seeing, and principles of thriving that we're seeing, and then how does it look more like a jazz ensemble that everybody brings something unique to it, but we're moving together in this direction. And ultimately, I think there still has to be these major shifts, that we still are having to shift from problem or pathology to purpose, from this idea of a scarcity, kind of fragmented youth development approach to a connected one, to one that really puts up barriers and has barriers to now how do we think about supported ecosystems. So I'm going to end there. As you could tell, I could talk about this all day long. And I would love to move to more interaction and discussion.
Ben, thank you. That was great. I think I speak for everyone. What a valuable slideshow presentation. Tons of information, tons of ideas. Where do we even begin? I would like to just offer to every single participant here, it would be great to hear from all of you. Each and every one of you will have a chance to jump in. I would like to open up the floor now to any questions or comments. And you can either use the raise hand function here in Zoom, or you can do this or wave, whatever you'd like. But I'd like to open up the floor now to any questions or comments. Again, thank you, Ben. That was fantastic.
Andrew, I will add this. There were a lot of great comments in chat. If anybody wants to share those comments openly, they might generate discussion. So maybe we could begin with your chat comments. Erica, you have your hand up.
Yes. So I just want to say, Ben, I was sitting here thinking to myself, if I was a church person, like you see on the movies, right at that moment, I was having like, amen, yes, yes, yes moments. And to be honest, it's hard to get me engaged from a webinar on a Friday. So especially on an Eagles Friday. So thank you for that. Oftentimes you can be in a space where you're talking about youth work and there's all this jargon that's so out here, and so much of it is not really connected to the work. So I thought that when you talked about really listening to the practitioners and listening to the youth before we spend all this space in the scholarly this thought space, let's really get to the heart of it. And I think that the more that we do that, the better opportunities we have to course correct, right? Because we aren't the 90s. I was born in the 70s, and I'm definitely not even in the era of the 80s, right? So the way we have to approach things has to change, because the way that the world is today has changed. So I thought that was really valuable. And I really loved how you elevated the fact that it's about the equitable practices, right? Understanding that some communities are under-resourced. They just don't have what it is that they need, right? Because it's not about equality. It's definitely about the equitable practices. So I found a lot of value in that as well. So just thank you for your message today. And I'm excited to hear from everyone else. Oh yeah, and I do this work for a living, so I guess that's probably should share that, because I come from Speak Up, and a lot of what we do, our framework is surrounded on the Searches Institute as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Erica. I'll give a little disclosure. My father was a pastor, and so as far away as I try to get away from it, there's sometimes where I hear preach, you know. So I appreciate that, and I'm really grateful you're here. And I think that there has to. I do believe there has to be a fundamental shift in how we're elevating the practitioner wisdom of the things that you know so well, Erica, that you just spoke about, because you know, part of it is really you know, one of the challenges for our staff too is like, how do we really understand the pulse of what's going on every day for those teachers that walk into the classroom? Of course, we know of the horrendous news of another school shooting, of the challenges that teachers are facing, or the practitioner who's there from from, you know, one of my closest friends has been at the same Boys and Girls Club for 20 plus years, and he's there every morning at like 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and then he comes back. He's there after school, and his kids that are in his area and in his neighborhood walk out the front door, and they have to be alert and have to be aware. Well, like, how are we doing things to support him? How are we building with him? How are we learning from what the wisdom is on the ground? Because that is the only way forward. We can't create a world where we have answers and we're trying to give it to people. That only perpetuates the kind of, I think, the inequities that exist. And so I can't overemphasize how important leveraging that wisdom really, I believe, really is. So I really appreciate what you all do too, Erica, and I'm so glad that you use Search Institute's work, because that really makes me happy to hear that. So
Erica, thank you. And I want to recognize Marty Bernicker as well. And to disclose also that we are a research partner with Speak Up currently, and incredible work on parenting communication. I highly recommend, if you're interested in that topic, having a look at speakup.org. I'm going to hand the mic over
Thank
now
you.
to, yeah, absolutely, Marty. I'm going to hand the mic now over to Rachel.
Thanks, Andrew. So hi, folks. If I didn't meet you on the last call, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto, and I've spent the last few decades in the NGO and government and executive sectors for children and youth advocacy. So I have to just go back for a second to tell you why I was so excited about today. Because Ben, when I saw your information available for the webinar, I was first introduced to the Search Institute and when it was still called the 40 Developmental Assets in the early 2000s, coming out of that 90s wave, that push of youth negative imagery. When I started my career as a youth employment counselor at a John Howard Society. And it was brought into our organization as the fundamental framework of how we would philosophically approach our work with the clients. So, of course, as you would imagine, at the John Howard Society, these are youth who are street engaged, addictions issues, struggling to get their GED. And I actually had those, if anybody remembers, maybe Mike does, those long bookmark versions of the little tick marks of all the developmental assets. And I would use those with, 16, 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds in front of them who felt like they couldn't even write a resume, that they've got nothing on it. They've got nothing to go out and offer the world. I'm like, well, let's stop and think about that for a minute. Let's look at what you do have. Let's look at who you are. Let's look at what you bring to the table. And their mentality would shift in a matter of minutes when they could see, here's this printed document from an academic place. Like, this looks legitimate, right? Like, this has power and it's telling me I have value. Oh my gosh. So that sort of experience early in my career very much pillared my work in strength-based and asset-based approaches to youth advocacy. Fast forward, and I have now completed my dissertation looking at why and how political adults who are making these decisions about our systems that serve children and youth bother to engage in political consultation with marginalized, disenfranchised youth. So when we actually get that advocacy to happen, I only found about 23 people in Canada to talk to who are doing this well, including our ambassador to the UN, a few senators, MPs, the Prime Minister's office. But I actually had our own ambassador look at me when I asked him and said, why do you bother to do this? Why do you have this outlook on youth? Why do you value what they have to say? He's like, Rachel, I don't have an answer for that for you. I'm like, okay, well, that's scary because we're trying to make more of this happen, right? Us as an entire advocacy sector for youth, we want more adults to have the perspective you have. And lo and behold, and this is why I think hearing today the history of the Search Institute has been so intriguing, because the adults that I spoke with as my participants actually talked to me about the motivating factor that why now, as powerful politicians or advocates in the civil society sector, why they bother to view youth this way is because they came from a strength-based experience where they themselves, as young people, were given opportunities and were valued. So we're a generation out now in the sector. We're breaking that mold that all of us that serve youth in some disenfranchised way were marginalized ourselves or have our own post-trauma history. That's not necessarily the case anymore. It's adults now who were young people who got to get into a meeting, who spoke to their mayor about the playground not being safe, who had a chance to go, to some national conference and talk to some leader and get heard, that were given those strength-based opportunities themselves and felt valued as a youth, are now ensuring that they're leveraging their power and their decision making and are opening the doors and including youth in their spaces. And I just thought that was such a phenomenal correlation to the values of the Search Institute and the developmental asset framework, that here we are now a generation later from when I got introduced to it. There's a longer history than that, but I can see the echo effect, the ripple of that positive community ecosystem being built around young people and how that can amplify greater opportunities for input, because these are generational fixes. These aren't going to be one sweeping legislative change of, mandating every country adhering to the UNCRC. Whoop-de-doo. We have to intrinsically feel this, and to feel it, we need to embody the learning. So I just thought I was so fascinated to come into today's session. I loved hearing the history and appreciate so much of it. I think it's hilarious that we have other 4-H peeps in the call and they're still correlated with you. As I mentioned in the chat, I did serve as executive director for Ontario. So yeah, the network is small. There's not that many of us, and we need to keep our relationships tight and foster them. So thank you so much for this talk today, and we're thrilled to hear the update about what the Search Institute's doing now.
Thank you so much, and I love hearing your story, because I think especially at that policy level and really thinking, I mean, there's such a need in that space too, and it's inspiring when you hear. This is the messages that I don't think get out there, is when you hear this tight-knit group of how people are really motivated to create these thriving ecosystems today, that recognize the incredible strengths that young people bring, but yet we still hear some of the same kind of echoes and narratives about young people all the time.
Indeed. Thank you, Rachel, for those really pretty rich insights from your own experience. And I really liked that connection that you were making with the presentation and what Search has done in terms of their unique contribution to the field, for sure. I'm going to hand it over now to Jackie.
Hello. I'm Jackie, born in the 90s. And every single time I'm on these calls, I feel even more called to this work, and just a call to contribute to this rhetorical shift. And I've spent the first 5 years of my career as an educator on the ground, particularly in college access work. And I've always thought, like, even though I was helping predominantly first generation students be the first in their family to access college, I felt so limited in my role at the same time. And I just found something off about the way we did things. And so as I just finished school and mental health counseling program at Penn, and student under Dr. Nakula. And I've been really interested in the role of the educator in this, because, and even the idea of what is the role of the educator in helping students thrive, because I think oftentimes when we think of thriving, we think of the outcome, when thriving is super messy. Yeah. Thriving is super messy. So I think even the idea of like a jazz my classical piano thing is coming out. But the fact that it's a jazz ensemble, it's the thing that sometimes you gotta kind of
Yeah.
move, the music moves in a certain way where humans don't operate like clockwork. And I know Nakula talks about this in like matters of interpretation of reciprocal transformation of, I think the role of the educator is they have to show their humanity as well. Helping students thrive doesn't mean that educators have to have their stuff together. And I think so much of, particularly in the post-secondary planning space, students and families, they'll look to the educator, the consultant, as the expert. When colleges are merely asking students, what does it mean to be human? And we're leading with strategy. And we're having to come up with strategies of why a kid didn't solve world peace at 17 and trying to compensate for that in like a deficit model. So I think of what the role of the educator is in it, and I think it's so essential of what would it look like for us to be relationships focused and provide an infrastructure where we're just being humans. And having that be the core and really embedding counseling back into college counseling. So I feel so called to this work, and I'm always so glad to be a part of these conversations.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that that's so important, Jackie, because like the bi-directional nature of thriving, and I think of, you know, I think of even my own development. Like I was not thriving in high school. No, I mean, it's a path. I mean, if we think about it as a path, it is a messy journey of course correction. And the investments, though, of some of the adults in my life and other people in my life were like kind of pointing me towards that direction, even when I was going the opposite direction. And anybody that, I think when you work with young people, you know that's the case. It's not, and I think whether you're talking about people who have a lack of access to resources and opportunity, or you're talking about people who are driven by performance, that they have this kind of performance-based identity of themselves. So it's all about grades and results and what college I get into. And at the core of that humanity is still this fundamental innate need to know, am I worthy? Am I a person of value? Is there something, do I have something to contribute to this world? And am I safe too, right? Those two things, am I worthy and am I safe, are core from the time we're born in the world, that gives us this sense, and really those have to be answered relationally. That really, I mean, if we're honest, am I worthy is a question of love in some ways. And am I safe is a question of trustworthiness. Like, and those two, when there's violations of those, they can create challenge. But there's something amazing about the relational healing that can take place from educators, from coaches, from youth workers that say, no, I see you. You are of value. You have something to offer this world. And that is we can't underestimate how critical that is to development. And I think sometimes we miss that kind of core, kind of fundamental piece of it. And we'll ask this question of and some of our research is really around how do you feel known and valued by the adults around you? And we're often surprised by how few people can really strongly agree with that, young people. And I think some of this is getting back to the core of that, of like, relationships is the work. Like it really is. It's and this moves into the other world. And Robin Schofield is actually listening in on this call too, who I've worked with at USC and continue to work with, who's head of sports psychology there, does amazing work in the performance world. And both of us have talked about this. The truth about relationships at the core is it is also a performance issue. We are better when we're connected. We are able to deal with more pain. We're able to deal with adversity. We're able to have this meaning that kind of pushes us. And yet sometimes we can get so focused on academic success or other kind of indicators that we and that are also important. But the work of relationships has to be intentional, and it has to be inclusive, and it has to be equitable when we start thinking about what we're providing there. And it's core. It's core to humanity. And so I just love the way you describe that and your heart about it, because that is what we need. We need you, Jackie, and that kind of next generation of this work of pushing it, continuing to push it, continuing to move it. So I love hearing that passion.
Andrew, if I can just jump in here for a moment, because at noon I have to lead another group, which is master's students interested in research of the type we're talking about. So it's a new academic year, and we have students getting involved in two different projects. One we call the Possibility Mentoring Project, and the other our Consortium for Mental Health and Optimal Development, where we reframe mental health from mental illness to being healthy mentally as part of thriving. But I want to just, before I leave, Ben, share an anecdote with you that really informed a lot of my thinking. It crystallized it in many ways. And this was working with a middle school student, I would say 20 years ago in the Boston area. And this was a student who clearly had a lot of ability, but he was failing in school. So I was talking with him about two of his classes, and he said about what it's going to take to improve in those classes and, work up to his potential. And he said, I'm not going to do that teacher's work. I said, what do you mean you're not going to do that teacher's work? He said, well, she doesn't even know who I am. Mm-hmm. If she doesn't know me, I'm not going to do her work. And I tried to make the argument that it's for you. It's not for her. This is your life and, your accomplishments. And it became so clear that from his perspective, his own education was a relational matter. He would only learn when relationally engaged with the teachers. And he was so convincing and so convicted about his perspective, there was no changing him. And I realized, we need to work not just at the individual student level, but at the relational level among students and teachers and students and others they care about. So that just, your comments made me think back to that experience 20 years ago, which I still hold dear and as an important learning moment for me. But thank you, Ben, and everybody on the call for what you've done. I know we go for another 15 minutes, Andrew, right? But I have to step out and organize this other meeting. But can't thank you enough, Ben, and for all the participants here with your comments and chat and hosting as usual.
Thanks, Mike. It's wonderful to see you, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. Take care, folks.
See you, Mike.
See you, Andrew.
Okay, who'd like to chime in next? I think we've got time for a couple more comments or questions.
I'd like to go next.
Pavi, great.
So hi, I'm Pavi. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate at Oklahoma State University, and my major is in environmental science. So you might ask me a question like, what is the environmental science graduate doing here? With education, empowering youth kind of talk. So a lot of my project involves educating and empowering frontline communities, especially the young adults, on the environmental issues they are facing. So I'm a 90s kid as well, but it is also important to note that I have a 2000, my son was born in 2015. So I have a young kid at home as well. So I have this responsibility of educating young kid starting from home and taking it to as my career. So I was looking at the Search Institute, and your presentation was really helpful in understanding like what it really does, and very much I'm learning a lot from the presentation and from the website itself. So I have a quick question for you. So my question is like, while it is important to make the young adults feel valued, how can we stress the importance of uh, you know, making them push to understand the environmental issues that they are facing, especially like, I'm originally from India. The place where I am from has this serious issue of oil spilling. Uh, and how can we empower young adults to get that place-based connection? I kind of feel that like, it's not always, I might sound a little pessimistic, but like, um, while it is important to feel valued, it is also important to feel that like,
Yeah.
we need to learn more and like do more to the environment, understand more about where we are, build that place-based connection, create more awareness. So how can we achieve that? Can you please explain, like, give a talk from your experience? Thank you.
Yeah, no, well, first of all, my PhD is from Oklahoma State, so I go Pokes. I was there. I know Stillwater well, and was in the College of Human Environmental Sciences. So lots of connection there. And I also have two small. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. So, I think what I hear part of in that question is also around motivation and motivation to contribute, especially to this important important issue of climate change and really understanding. I think when we talk about the fundamental, what I would say is like the kind of innate need to feel this sense of value and safety and have safety, like that I'm a person of value, and that and also there's safety and predictability to my proximity and my environment. I think those are the core fundamental starting points that then really, I think what I hear in what you're talking about is really helping young people develop a sense of purpose. And because purpose isn't just a goal. When we talk about the science of purpose, right, we're talking about that it is a long-term aim or this view. So it's connected to something bigger than themselves. Like, and I think the developmental period of adolescence is so prime, actually, to begin to help them think more abstractly and understand who they are in the world, but also that there's something bigger, and there's this understanding that I can contribute and make a difference there. And some of the probably most amazing advocates of climate change and really doing something about it come from that kind of adolescent group. I think if we think developmentally before that, that kind of those general sense of developmental needs of a sense of autonomy or competence to change the world, that can be different based on the developmental ages that people are going through. But even as a young, as my 6-year-old, for example, because of some of the things he's learning in school, like when we're in the park and he sees a piece of trash on the ground or he sees something, he will often bring that up and say, "Dad, people shouldn't do that because it's hurting the environment." And there's something in his curiosity that we try to encourage his autonomy towards, well, you can do something about it, Leo. Like there's things you can do about it. And so, this isn't what I think you're saying, but I hear this kind of, just to give you an extreme perspective of this in the sports world, is like we will have the same conversation with coaches well, you can hear it even with professional coaches, Olympic athletes, is that, sometimes coaches might say, well, yeah, like it's all good. We want people to feel that they're people of value and that they're, have good sense of self-worth, but we want them to excel. We want them to pursue excellence. We want them to be motivated. And this generation is entitled, and they like, so am I not, am I contributing to the problem by really focusing on, their value and who they are? And the challenge there is to keep saying, no, actually, that is the starting point. Because as one of my great mentors said to me in grad school, for my master's degree, he said a very, very, if you knew him with his bellowing voice, he said, Ben, you have to earn the right to challenge. And he was talking about, like, the reality is, like, for us to challenge this generation of young people, if you work with young people, nobody wants to be challenged by somebody in a way that, if they don't know my strength, they don't know who I am, and they come up to me and say, Ben, your lifestyle is just not good. You need to work out. You need to eat better. You need to. Now, my mom can pick up the phone and she can call me and she can say, Benji, because that's what she calls me, I love you, but you need to be taking care of yourself. I'm going to listen to that relational piece differently. And that's because there's a core of how I know my mom sees me, or that person sees me. And I guess that's the point here, is like the value and the kind of, I am a person of value is the starting point to say, now I have value to be able to contribute to making change in the world. And if that's missed, then it's really hard for it to get to those next kind of levels of thinking about what purpose is, and the action-oriented nature of that purpose, and the motivation and urgency that today's issues or things that are going on need to have for being solved. And the other thing the last thing I'll also say, well, no, it's probably not the last thing. There's this movement now towards really elevating student voice, which I think, and youth voice, which is really, really important. But I think the challenge to that is, if you're going to amplify or elevate student voice or youth voice, but not give them the opportunity to contribute or be responsive to create change based on that voice, then it's just perpetuating really mistrust. Like, you're just going to perpetuate. Nobody wants to give their feedback and give their voice and then nothing be done about it. Like, that is a lot of organizational surveys that happen, or like students are like, so there's part of that too, of like, if we're talking about getting youth to step into these roles, we have to be able to share the power and give them the opportunity to be in the room to make mistakes, and the room to like say the wrong things or to not do the right thing. And so, like, but I'm very hopeful about this generation too, as well.
Actually, thank you for answering it. Now, like, as an environmental PhD candidate, I always think about the goal, but now I've learned this lesson that, I have to concentrate on the value and the purpose. So thanks for enlightening me.
Thank you, Pavi, for your question, and of course, Ben. Um,
Okay, I think I'll go next.
Good. I was just about to invite you, Bako. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm Bako. I have a long name, but I just go by Bako. I am originally from a small West African country called Togo. Currently, I am at Alabama State University, where I'm pursuing my doctorate in educational leadership policy and law. And my research topic is knowledge ecology and African diaspora, using social media to make connections around the world. But I think this is the best connection to make. And I just happened to say it. And I said, I am going to go here. I'm going to participate. The challenge that I have is basically my son. He started college at Auburn University, telling me that I'm going into accounting. Only a year after to change and say, well, I feel like I'm going to do psychology, but I want to also keep business as my minor. He graduated in May, and was hoping to explore more the type of psychology that he want to go in.
Mhm.
But I'm just a librarian, so I don't know how to advise him. I do all my research, and like you just said, it's very difficult to talk to young people, especially when you are not you are not experts in the area. So I'm reaching out to you guys to see, he's been home now. He's not home, but he stayed at Auburn, trying to see if he can find something that he can do that will help him better determine what area in psychology to go to.
Mm.
And so, since you guys from the presentation, Ben, again, thank you for sharing, and everybody, Gilmore, sharing your experiences working with young people. Um, if he could reach out or they have any opportunity that could get him moved to, how young people are. Few more months,
Yeah.
he may start losing interest. But he did his research. He sent me an email telling me, this is what I need. This is what I want. This is the reason why I want to go in psychology. But I don't want that interest to
Well, I'm sure, I mean, UPenn is one of the best and thinking about especially psychology and business, and they have a lot of really cool things at UPenn. And I'll tell you this, Baco, and I mean it. Give him my email. Have him
all
email
right.
me.
Thank you.
I'll respond to it and give some thoughts about the subfields of psychology. They're vast. There's lots of just
Yes.
different ways you can go, and some of that's represented here. But
Mm.
at that intersection of business and psychology, I think there is a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of opportunity today more than ever. And so there's some interesting things I'd be happy to share with him.
All right. I appreciate it. Because I can't.
Yeah, I know the feeling as a father, and mine are young right now, but I can imagine just how much you care about your son finding that rhythm. I just put my email in the chat for you.
Okay.
So I'm happy to respond. And I'm sure Andrew and others at UPenn, they can give you a lot of other ways to engage and understand that too.
Okay. Thank you very much.
One of
Yeah.
the things you may not know about Speak Up is that our secret ingredient is that we put young people in the room with parents who are not their own and
Yeah.
school adults, and that we don't put you in with your own family member, because our experience has shown that you can gain perspective from
Yes.
other adults so that's the magic of the Speak Up model. So hopefully that intrigues you to jump on there. But yeah, so I was laughing when you were saying, could somebody else give the same advice that might, I'm teasing. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
I had to laugh because my daughter just graduated from Newman University in May.
Mhm.
And when she went into school, she's like, Mom, I want to be a doctor. I said, okay, great. And then after about the first year, she's like, would you be upset if I didn't want to be a doctor? I was like, I didn't send you to school to be a doctor. You chose your
You
major.
make your choice, yes.
Right. So finally it came down to, she was like, well, I really like the research of it, right? So it's like you give young people the opportunity to figure it out, right? And the support for me was, I don't speak science, but I have a ton of good friends that do. So some are public health people. We have pediatrician friends. I have people that work in labs. So it's okay when we as parents don't have the answers, but we can say, hey, these are some people that could probably navigate this with you, right? So
Exactly.
you're in the right direction.
I
Thank
love it.
you.
See, we're creating the ecosystem right now, the thriving
Yeah,
ecosystem right now.
exactly. Exactly. Okay, folks. Well, we are about out of time. Um, I have a couple of very brief comments that I can't help but share. So my background is in anthropology. That's my training, and I worked in South Africa and in a rural part of South Africa where I learned about a lot about different systems of kinship, family and social organization, on a village level, on a regional level, on even like a language, cultural level. So powerful, you know, to have that experience and to basically have your whole mindset just kind of blown away, and you understand things from a completely different level, at a totally new level. I wanted to share that because I think that it's really worth considering how individualistic and how much is put on a young person individually to figure it all out.
Hmm.
And I couldn't help but really focus on that message, Ben, from your words. You know, we just talked about it, the ecosystem. Um, you know, I learned through my field work and living there just a different way of thinking about individualism and the individual person and our relationships between generations, ancestors. I mean, this is all part of just how, yeah, just a new way, a different way of learning about how we're all related and how we're interconnected together. So I see this work as really pushing that message that we are interdependent, that we need to take care of each other. And so anyway, I couldn't help but share that. I was really inspired by the presentation along that theme. Do you have any thoughts on that? I know we're kind of running out of time.
No, I mean, well, I just agree with you, Andrew. And I think that more than ever, we need that approach, that interdependent approach. And interdependence is beautiful because it's not it's not asking for it truly is people being able to be their authentic self and bring that self and be connected. So
Exactly.
it's, you know, it's not an assimilation of an identity. It's not, doesn't mean that we all have to assume commonality and everything, but we can discover that commonality as we get to know each other. And if we would start to in today's, you know, polarized environment, it just, I feel like we need this more than ever. And so I just really appreciate you saying that, Andrew. And anthropology in particular, I feel like it's always like, it's like the cousin or the you know, some of the greatest thinkers come out of anthropology around systems and systems thinking too.
Mhm. Thank you. And it's funny, whenever I talk about what I do, almost one of the first things I say is, I am not a psychologist. So, you know, I sort of beg off like, okay, I'm not a psychologist, but um, but like you said, there is a lot of overlap. So, thank you for that. I'd like to invite any last comments. I don't want to necessarily have the last word if someone else wants to jump in. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. And of course, thank you very much to Ben for enlightening us today, teaching us today, and thank you everyone for your comments. And we hope to see you for the next speaker series event, which will be the first Friday of October. I believe it's October 4th. I'll have to double check that, but stay tuned on the GPN website. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.